Okay, let's start. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our end of webinar, end of course webinar tonight. I'm here on my own tonight. Nina is off on parental leave, and so I'm going to be running the webinar tonight. So if you have any issues, any technical issues, please do let me know, because it's my first time of handling that side of things. So welcome, tēnā koutou I tēnei ahi ahi, Kowhiki Hargraves aho, and I'd like to start with a karakia. Tēnā tātou katoa e hui hui nei I tēnei ahi ahi, koia nei te kaupapa mo o tātou a tātou ako manga, kia kaha tātou ki te mahitahi I roto I te araha, kia whai whakaro, kia etahi ati mi o rātou whakaro. Kia mahia a tātou mahi I roto I te koa mi te ihihitanga, kia hono a tātou hei whānau akonga kotahi. Tēnā anō tātou katoa. Okay, so welcome to the course, to the end of course webinar. I'm going to just enable the chat function so that if anybody has any issues with the with the sound quality or the video quality tonight, you can let me know. We're going to just give you guys an opportunity to reflect upon what you've learned through the course and ask any questions, and hopefully share some of your reflections and things with us tonight. Before we do that, I thought I would just run through some of the key points of the things that we covered. And then as we come to the questions, we have the opportunity for you to raise your hand if you'd like to speak. And what I can do then is I can start your the process of enabling your microphone so that we will all be able to hear each other. Okay, so let's hope it all works out well. It's all very new to me. Okay, so our course, intentional teaching and effective assessment. It was all about how effective assessment practices in early childhood education support us to be intentional teachers and enhance children's learning. So obviously there's two key themes there were intentional teaching and assessment. So I just want to go through a few things, a few thoughts that have come to my mind as I've been reflecting and preparing for this webinar. So why is intentional teaching so important? I think that that came through as we looked at the sociocultural perspective on learning, in which children's learning takes place because they're working with other people, and that the thinking and learning that's going on is actually a product of the group. It's not the child and the material. There's also, teachers and other children around that are constantly mediating that learning, and so that's why we have a really important role. So if we can be a lot more intentional about what we're doing as teachers and have those intentions at the back of our mind, then we can make the most of our spontaneous interactions with children. Just when we see an opportunity, we can grab it because we know what we're trying to teach, we know what we're trying to aim for at the end of the day. And I think the other really cool thing about intentional teaching is that it really enables us to co-construct curriculum, which I know when I was a teacher was what I really aspired to, let me bring some of my knowledge and add it to some of your knowledge, the children's knowledge, and let's create some kind of project or some kind of learning together. And of course, you've got to be hugely intentional to be able to do that. The children need to be intentional too. So it's about drawing those things together. And I think the other thing that really struck me that is super important to be aware of is all that research that says it's, when teachers and children engage in those sort of really sustained and meaningful encounters, that's when the greatest learning happens. And I think intentional teaching and the assessment that underpins it can really help us with that. So I think when I'm thinking about intentional teaching as well, I want to kind of draw on the principles of Te Whāriki and make sure that my understanding or your understanding of intentional teaching kind of really reflects and is aligned with those principles. So if we think about whakamana, empowerment, making sure that our intentional teaching is about enhancing the child's mana and their sense of competence, always ensuring that our intentions are able to do that, that it's not something that diminishes children's capacity in any way or capability. I think that when we're intentionally teaching as well, we really need to look at that holistic way in which children learn and make sure that our intentions are really towards the whole of the child and the whole holistic learning process. Intentional teaching also, you know, we can link that to families and communities, making sure that our intentions are in line with their intentions, and drawing on the rich resource that we have of family and community to help us to really plan really awesome programs for our children. And finally, the relationships. Or intentional teaching wouldn't happen without relationships. So but just recognizing all the people, the places, all the things that could contribute to children's learning, I think that's a really powerful way in which we can be intentional. Yeah, and then reflecting on assessment. What did we learn about assessment? I think that a key part of the message there was learning about the two different types of assessment, how there's formative assessment, which is really helping you to form your ongoing plans for teaching and learning. And then there's the summative assessment, which is about summing up what the child's able to do. And that summative assessment can be useful for transition. It can be useful for kind of, I guess, reporting about a child's learning as they're about to make a transition in their life, but otherwise it's not very useful for supporting our subsequent teaching. And so it was the formative assessment that we really were focusing on in this course. We weren't thinking of assessment of learning, but definitely assessment for learning, assessment that's going to feed into the next cycle of learning and teaching. And of course, formative assessment is going on all the time. It should be going on all the time. And you know, we're always observing and interacting with children. And so a lot of what we're doing goes unrecorded. But I think that as well as those in the moment responses, if we've got behind us, we've got a learning story that, or a set of assessments that have really enabled us, that's guiding our thinking and really enabling us to be intentional, then those in the moment interactions can be a lot more spot on, a lot more focused. So yes, there is the informal and the formal, but I see them as really feeding off each other. So what's important when it comes to assessment? I think for me, it really is that very careful observation at the beginning and that time spent trying to interpret and understand what's going on for children and getting all those different perspectives and making hypotheses. I think that was a really useful concept for me, that you know, we're trying to make hypotheses about what is going on for children, why are they interested in this? And then, of course, all that analysis, all that observation, and we need to put that to good use in our ongoing teaching. And I think that although it's really important to plan from your assessments, I think that as long as you've got real strength in the observation and the interpretation, then you will be able to respond in quite a flexible way. Because when you're planning on paper, it doesn't always work out like that in practice. So you'll be able to take up these opportunities, unexpected opportunities, and still further the same goals that you have for children. And of course, in the course, we learned a lot about the learning story, but I would really like to emphasize that it can be any form of documentation, any form of assessment. That pedagogical documentation that is talked about in Reggio Emilia, it's the same process of really observing and carefully trying to interpret and hypothesize. Those processes can come into many different kinds of assessment, so we can be quite creative as how we see that. Okay, so I don't know, before I was trying to share my screen, and I don't know, I will try to do that again and see if you guys can see it. Thank you, Carlita. Sorry, it's my first time using this. You will have to be patient with me. Thank you, Carlita, for letting me know. So I put the question up there, and that is a question around the changes you've made to your assessment practice and the impact of those changes. Is there anyone who would like to share with us? As I said, I can just unmute your microphone or enable you to use the microphone and share with us. And if you'd like to do that, you can just click on the raise hand button, which I find on the bottom of my screen. And hopefully we can get that working. or if people prefer to contribute via the chat feature, that could also work. And it can be a bit scary speaking on in front of everyone, but I won't be enabling video, so you don't need to worry if you're already tucked up in your pajamas. Great to have so many of you on the joining us tonight. Lots of names that I recognise from the discussion forum. It's good to see you. Would you like to move on to another question? Please do let me know if this simply isn't working. So then the next question was thinking about what you'd like to implement consistently in your assessment practice. I think coming through in the discussion forum was this idea that, you know, there's an awful lot that we can put into a learning story. And if we want a learning story to be really good, you know, we need to get all the perspectives of everybody that we can, and we need to make sure we're linking it back to other stories. And that's a hugely time-consuming process. So how do you see that going forward? It's not something you'll be able to do every time. So how could that work? I do worry that I simply don't have the process working well enough for you guys tonight. I can see the chat comments. I can't see anyone raising their hands. I don't know if that's because nobody wants to speak, or I'm missing something. Okay, just check the chat. I can see someone on the chat there. Oh, thank you, Michelle. So the part you really want to implement going forward is incorporating different perspectives, other teachers, families, and the children's own voice. Yeah, great. I think that for me, and I don't know if you found this too, Michelle, the most powerful thing for me has been to really start very early in the process of writing my learning story to gain those other perspectives. Because I have tried out things where I've shared my story with other teachers and with parents once I finished it, and I don't know if you guys have found the same, but I didn't get much feedback. I kind of got agreement. Never really got challenged. So I would really like to, you know, encourage you to, you know, it can be a conversation at the end of the day with a parent. You've observed something that very day and you plan on writing it up in your next non-contact time. I think that time between observing it and having a chance to write it up is your time to gather different perspectives, and just, you know, it can be a 5-minute chat with a colleague while you can at a quiet moment. And as I say, with parents on pickup, but I think it's really important to get it early, because once you present something finished, people find it very hard to disrupt that. It would, you know, you'd have to be quite a strong character, I think, to say, oh, hang on, especially a parent maybe to a teacher, and especially depending on families' ideas about, you know, respecting teachers and being respectful and agreeing. Thanks, Carlita. I can read your comment too. You're trialling assessing as many tamariki as you can within your room curriculum meeting. You share observations and collectively celebrate each tamariki. That's a lovely thing to do. And then reflect upon intentional teaching to strengthen them. That is exciting. So is that something that's come from the course? Yeah, I think that if I could go to a staff meeting at the end of, you know, a busy day where I just got to talk about something I saw, just tell a story about an observation that I saw, and listen to my colleagues share their stories. I think that once you share a story, they say, well, actually, I saw this child do something connected to that, and it just blooms, doesn't it? Great, that's really exciting. Anybody else want to share anything? Our next question is about which area do we think is most important to focus on? I've got some great comments coming in. I'll just need to backtrack a bit. So before we go on to the next question, Nina, you had a discussion over the size of a learning story. Yeah, that makes a very good conversation, I think. And what was the outcome? If you could write a little bit in your comment about what your team determined would be the best length for a learning story. My feeling is it would probably vary. And Michelle, you're bringing parents in more, and you would like to do that more. Yeah, I think the more time you can spend in conversations with families and really building those relationships, then I think you can get a lot more input to the assessment and planning process. I think that really beginning with that really strong relationship and having a look at ideas for improving relationships, but a lot of it is just a lot of face-to-face time. And if that's something you want to prioritize in your centre, then it's thinking about the structures and things underneath that underpin that enable it to happen, enable those conversations to happen. And they can be the conversations about everyday matters, as well as, hey, I observed this today, and what do you think? So Nina, should we be writing a long story? And do the parents have time to read long stories? What do others think? I think that time is poor for most people, for parents and for teachers. I think there's a real skill and art to really condensing down what was the important thing that you observed. I think that our curriculum is so broad and our way of teaching so holistic that so many different kinds of learning come into one experience that it can be really hard to pick out what you're going to focus on in the learning story. But I think if you are writing really long stories every time, that's probably an area to work on. Distilling the key idea, the most important idea. And if parents don't have time to read the long story, which I doubt that many do, then being able to put it in a concise way is going to really help parents. I have been a parent attending early childhood education, and my child attending early childhood education, and got longer stories. And as passionate as I am about early childhood education and assessment and things, they are hard to read. It is hard to read, and hard to read to your child, which is what you want to do. Yeah, and I think that if you look at all those principles and ideas of what we want to put into a learning story, we want to have all those perspectives, we want to have that linking backwards and forwards to others. If we can do that broadly over the range of stories that we write for a child in a given period, then not every story needs to tick off every aspect. Michelle offers the idea of breaking the learning story into 3 parts. So you're talking about the child's experience, then you're analysing the learning that's happening and where to next. And you've put about the photos too. I think that sometimes a photo can speak 1,000 words. So maybe we don't need to describe what's in the photo. Think about what the photo can do for you, and particularly when we use video and upload those to a assessment platform, then again there's a lot that doesn't need to be described, isn't there? Carlito, I really like that you've said. I would like to implement more anecdotal notes through my days and capture their voices more proactively each day. I think there's something about, we just talked about parents' desire to read a long story, but I think that the stories can be really engaging when you actually use the words of children, because parents can see their children reflected in that story. I think there's something that makes the story so much more authentic and real and meaningful when you've got the exact words that children said. And yes, I've certainly done the kind of learning story where I just remember what happened, but I found that there's so much more comes out when I've made notes. So that was something that I really wanted to advocate for in the course. So just give it a go. And I know that people have different ways of learning and doing things, but yeah, but I think that if you just try, if a notepad and pen works for you, it certainly works very well for me. And I'm glad to hear it's been useful for you, Carlita. Okay, Diane, one of the things you found useful from this course was the recommendation to use headings. Great. I think that was the initial idea of the learning story. Was actually really quite structured. Margaret Carr's original sort of plan for how you write a learning story was very structured, and that can be really useful. And I think even if you don't keep to the structure all the time, once you've worked with the structure a few times, you can be a bit more creative with it, but it's still just knowing there are those three parts. And that's obviously what you were saying too, Michelle. Yes, I think Nina, going back to the photos, they are also really engaging, aren't they, for parents and for children. And when children look at our learning stories, especially if they look at them without an adult reading them out to them, which does happen, then what do the photos say to the children? Yeah. It makes me wonder as well whether we can use our photographs quite intentionally as part of our intentional teaching. So printing these photographs, maybe taking photographs of as provocations. Could you take photos of things that you think children might like to do before they've done them, as a kind of planning, as the photos for the planning section of your learning story. Yeah. Okay, great. Good to hear that some of the things that you good to hear about some of the things that you want to focus on going forward. Just see if I can move forward to the next. I think this is the last question. And I think we've talked about this a little bit too. How do we plan to make assessment and planning for intentional teaching more manageable? So I think that is really key. Once we know what our principles are for assessment and we understand how to write a really good learning story, how do we actually put that into practice? And I read in the forum quite a lot of different ideas for making that more manageable. Okay, Diane, you're talking about the follow-up story. I think that's really important. That's the idea of continuity. I'm wondering if it's possible, if you start with a sort of a deeper learning story at the beginning of an interest for a child, and then follow it with very short kind of follow-up pieces that don't need to go into that in-depth understanding of what's going on for the child. Because in that first story, perhaps you've got a lot of hypotheses and a lot of analysis going on for what's happening for the child, and then you can use those follow-ups just to show how it's progressing, but also kind of help you develop that thread of analysis without having to repeat it all every time. I don't know if that's a way that you can make things more manageable. But I think if you're going to spend time intentionally responding to children, then that's a really good thing to be writing about too. Does anybody have any questions? Nina, we've looked at the one about the length of a story. I just wonder that I do think there is a wealth of knowledge and understanding within this group of you guys that have done the course with us over the past few weeks. And I think that, maybe if anyone does have any questions or something they're still struggling with, if they wanted to write it there, then I think that we might be able to help each other. Diane says the follow-up story could be much shorter. Yeah, definitely. You can just start with a a phrase that says, as we've noticed before, you're really interested in developing your skills in, and so you're alluding back to that story, and so you've got that continuity, you've got that sense of progress, you've got that sense that you as a teacher are really following this for a child, and you've cut out a bit of the work. I also think follow-up photographs can be fine too. Mm. Yep, so using Story Park, just having photos with a bit of a caption, a bit of a blurb, that's a good idea. And Michelle says, use prior knowledge of the child, gathering info from other teachers and finally, yeah. Yeah, that's a good idea, revisiting activities and noticing differences in the experiences and learning. So I think then the important thing would be really choosing when to go in depth with a learning story, choosing when you think that something you've observed has got a lot of potential, rather than writing an in-depth learning story for, sometimes we want to write about something special that's happening. I'm thinking with an infant or toddler when they, develop some movement skill, some kind of milestone, I suppose, and it's nice to be able to write about that. But just seeing which of those stories that we go deeper into are going to be the ones where we really think this is something that we need to understand better. I think also seeing assessment and intentional teaching is a bit of a process of inquiry, because we don't know quite where we're going or what's happening for a child. And I think that, for me, is a really exciting part of assessment and intentional teaching. Diane says that, okay, you're wondering about the individual learning plans developed periodically. Okay. I'm wondering if it's necessary if learning stories and assessments do show continuity and progress. I do think it's one of those things, Diane, isn't it, where it's making sure we can tick a box and ensuring that the box is there so that we can tick it, and it would be much harder to do with learning stories, checking through a portfolio for continuity and progress. So it seems a bit of a shorthand way. I think that when the learning stories are, when you've got a really good solid background of learning stories and follow-up stories and all this, this trail of documentation around a child's learning, do you still then need some kind of manageable way of keeping track of it? I know some people working with quite large groups of teachers and other children, so being able to know the intentional learning that you're planning for each of those children without having kind of something to refer to. I think some people in the course are using the individual learning plans. Maybe if there's anyone here tonight that is, and can comment whether they think it's an extra layer of paperwork or whether it's something that's actually useful. My concern would be that, again, that extra layer of paperwork on top, or actually even leaving less time for writing the learning stories. I think individual learning plans could be a great outcome of an assessment process, but they would really need to be based on that in-depth understanding from a child, which comes from really careful observation and careful interpretation. Whether that's written as a learning story or not, I think the important thing is that we're really carefully observing and we're really carefully analysing that learning, not seeing it in that surface interest of this child likes the sand, so I'll set up more things in the sand for them tomorrow. Really looking deeper at why the child likes the sand and what aspects of that environment in the sandpit they're using for their ongoing learning and development. Okay, Michelle says that she uses them. Just a great way to see where the child is going. They don't have to be huge or time consuming. They also bring fun into the process. Yeah, I wonder if it gives you a chance to reflect on your series of documentations of your child's learning that taking that step back and saying, okay, where is this going, and putting it in a very concise format so that in your head you've got a very concise understanding of what's going on for a child. And like you say, Michelle, that families and other teachers can contribute to. I think it probably does fall into making it more manageable, Diane. But if you do feel that you're just repeating what you've done in your learning story, then it would be frustrating. Yeah, that's also useful for transition. Yeah, I can see the value, because we don't have time to look at all the stories every time we want to think about where a child is and where they're going next. So it's kind of like a bit like the way we might use a contents page or an index. You know, there's this whole series of stuff going on around this topic for a child, and just briefly summarising that. Okay, that's a really good tip, Diane. I did say I wasn't great on the technological part of this, running this webinar. If people turn their chat to all panelists and attendees, then you can see other comments. So yes, if you haven't done that already, you can change your chat to make sure you can see everybody talking. But I think I've been pretty good on reading them all out. So don't worry if you missed them. I think we'll just run for another few minutes. So if anyone else would like to share just something they want to celebrate, I'm really keen to hear some celebratory stories of things that you've achieved. There's been some great feedback tonight about what you guys have been able to, you know, how you've been able to affect change. Or again, if there are any further questions, or you want to draw on this rich learning community that we have for ideas. Okay. Well, thank you so much for being part of our first ever Education Hub course on assessment and intentional teaching. I do hope you enjoyed it, and that you've taken the time to complete the evaluation form, or when you get to the end of the course that you do that, because obviously we're always keen to improve. And I've definitely learned lots from being part of the online discussion forum. So thank you for those interesting, for sharing, and for those interesting thoughts and ideas. And yeah, I wish you all the best with your ongoing intentional teaching and assessment processes. Thank you. Good night.